A child comes home from school. They drop their backpack by the door, go to their room, and close it quietly behind them. No stories about what happened today, no names mentioned, no plans for the weekend with anyone. And if you ask them how school was, they say fine, just fine. From the outside, it can look like introversion. It can look like a phase. It can look like nothing. But inside that child, something very specific is happening. Something that most adults around them completely miss. And something that, if left unnamed and ununderstood, follows that child for decades. Here is what most people do not know. Children who grow up without friends do not all experience it the same way. In fact, psychologists have identified that they tend to fall into very distinct psychological types. Some choose solitude without anyone realizing it is a choice. Others desperately want connection but have a brain that makes it feel impossibly difficult. And a third group tried to belong, got hurt in a way they could not process, and quietly decided it was safer to stop trying. And what is even more fascinating is what happens to those children when they grow up. Because the child who had no friends does not simply outgrow that experience, they carry it. It shapes how they move through relationships, how they handle rejection, how much they trust people, and what they believe, deep down, about whether they are someone worth knowing. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you might recognize someone you know, or you might recognize yourself. The first type, the child who chose solitude without knowing it. There is a child who sits alone at lunch and does not look particularly sad about it. They are reading, or thinking, or watching what is happening around them with a kind of quiet curiosity. Their classmates are loud and social and always in groups, and this child simply is not, and nobody quite knows what to make of them. This child is not broken. They are not depressed. They are not even necessarily lonely. But the world around them has decided, without asking, that something must be wrong. Here is what is actually happening inside their mind. Some children are born with a nervous system that processes social interaction very differently. The noise, the unpredictability, the constant negotiation of group dynamics is not exciting to them. It is exhausting. While other children get energy from being around people, this child loses energy. And solitude is not emptiness for them. It is restoration. What makes this psychologically interesting is the gap between how this child feels on the inside and how they are perceived on the outside. Inside, they are often rich with inner life. They think deeply. They feel intensely. They have elaborate inner worlds that no one around them ever gets to see. Outside, they look withdrawn, distant, odd, even, and here is where something important happens. Because the world does not leave this child alone. Adults worry, other children exclude or ignore, and slowly the message reaches this child not through any single dramatic moment, but through 1,000 small ones. The way you are is a problem. You should be different. Being alone means something is wrong with you. And that message, received early enough and often enough, does not stay on the surface. It goes deep. It becomes part of how this child understands themselves. And the adult that child becomes often carries a very specific wound, the belief that their natural way of being in the world is fundamentally flawed, that they are too much and not enough at the same time, too internal, too quiet. That adult often finds relationships confusing and exhausting. Not because they do not want connection, but because every attempt at connection comes loaded with an old fear, that if someone truly sees how they are, they will confirm what the world decided about them back then, that they are strange, that they do not quite fit, that something about them is simply wrong. The second type, the child who wanted friends but could not reach them. This child is different. This child watches the groups form at recess and wants, more than almost anything, to be part of one. They rehearse what they will say, they approach, and something goes wrong. The conversation does not land the way they imagined. The joke falls flat. They misread a social cue. They say the wrong thing at the wrong moment. And the other children move on, barely noticing, while this child stands there replaying the interaction and trying to figure out what just happened. This is not shyness in the simple sense of the word. This is something more specific. The social world operates on a set of unspoken rules that most children absorb almost automatically through observation and interaction. But for some children, those rules are genuinely difficult to read. The subtleties of tone, of timing, of knowing when to speak and when to listen, of understanding what is funny and what is inappropriate, of reading the invisible social hierarchy of a classroom. These things do not come naturally to everyone, and a child who struggles with them is not socially lazy or indifferent. They are working harder than anyone around them realizes, and still falling short. What happens to this child over time is particularly painful to understand. Because they do not stop caring. They keep trying. But each failed attempt leaves a residue, a small deposit of self-doubt that accumulates. And after enough attempts, after enough moments of watching other children connect effortlessly while they struggle, this child begins to draw a conclusion about themselves. Not about their skills, which could be learned, about their worth, about whether they are the kind of person that other people naturally want to be around. That conclusion is almost always wrong. But it does not feel wrong. It feels like evidence. It feels like the logical result of everything they have experienced. And it becomes the lens through which they see every future social interaction. The adult this child becomes often has a very recognizable pattern. They want deep, genuine connection more than most people. But they approach every new relationship with a background hum of anxiety. They over-explain. They over-apologize. They misread neutral expressions as disapproval. They replay conversations for hours afterward, looking for the moment they got it wrong. Not because they are neurotic, but because their nervous system learned very early that social situations are unpredictable, and that the cost of getting it wrong is being left alone. The third type. The child who stopped trying. This child had friends, or something close to it. They were part of a group, or they had one person they trusted. And then something happened. A betrayal, an exclusion, a moment of cruelty that the adults around them minimized or missed entirely. Maybe they were left out of a birthday party everyone else was invited to. Maybe a best friend turned on them suddenly and publicly. Maybe they trusted someone with something private, and that trust was broken in the most humiliating way possible. Children do not always have the words for what this kind of experience does to them. They cannot say, "I am now recalibrating my understanding of whether relationships are safe." But that is exactly what their brain is doing. Because the brain of a child is not just storing memories. It is building predictions. It is learning what to expect from the world. And when the world delivers a lesson that says people who get close to you will eventually hurt you, that lesson does not stay in the past. It travels forward. It becomes a filter. This child does not dramatically announce that they are done with friendship. They just quietly stop reaching out. They become self-sufficient in a way that looks mature but is actually protective. They develop interests that do not require other people. They find ways to be busy and occupied that keep them from having to enter the space where connection, and therefore hurt, is possible. And here is what makes this type particularly complex. On the surface, this child often seems fine, even confident. They have learned to perform okayness so well that most adults never look deeper. But underneath that performance is a child who made a decision, not consciously but with their whole nervous system, that the risk of connection is not worth the cost, that it is safer to be alone than to be betrayed again. The adult this child becomes is often the most difficult to reach, not because they are cold or unfeeling. Quite the opposite. They feel deeply. But they have built a system of walls so sophisticated, so well constructed, that even they sometimes forget the walls are there. They will tell you they are independent, that they prefer their own company, that they do not need a lot of people in their life, and they believe it. But somewhere underneath all of that is the echo of a child who once wanted to belong and learned, in the most painful way available, that wanting things from other people leads to getting hurt. Three very different children. Three very different experiences of the same invisible struggle. And yet, when they grow up, they share something. A particular relationship with belonging that most people around them will never fully understand. They share the experience of having spent formative years outside the social world that their peers inhabited. And that experience leaves a specific kind of mark. Not always visible, not always disabling, but always present in some form. It shows up in how they handle groups. A room full of people who all seem to know each other can feel, even at 40 years old, like a school cafeteria where every seat is taken. It shows up in how they respond to conflict in relationships. A small disagreement can activate a fear that feels wildly disproportionate to the situation, because somewhere in their nervous system, conflict still means abandonment. It shows up in how they speak to themselves when they make a social mistake. The internal voice that says, "You always do this, you never get it right, nobody actually wants you around." And perhaps most importantly, it shows up in how difficult it is for them to believe, truly believe, that the people in their life actually choose to be there, that the friendships they have as adults are real, that they are not one mistake away from being left alone again. These are not small things. They are the quiet architecture of a life shaped by an experience that the world never took seriously enough to name. If you were that child, the one who sat alone, the one who tried and failed, the one who stopped trying altogether, there is something worth knowing. What happened to you was not a reflection of your worth. It was a reflection of a world that did not know how to include you. And those are not the same thing, even though they felt identical at the time. The experience of growing up without friends is one of the most quietly significant things that can happen in a childhood, not because it defines you, but because it shapes you in ways that are worth understanding, worth naming, worth looking at with honesty and with compassion. Because when you can see the pattern clearly, when you can trace the root of the wall, or the anxiety, or the disbelief that anyone would truly choose you, something shifts. Not all at once, not dramatically, but enough to begin asking a different question. Not why can nobody see me, but what happens if I let someone try. If this video made you think, or made you recognize something in yourself, or in a child, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to keep exploring the psychology of childhood and how it quietly shapes everything that comes after, subscribe. There is so much more to talk about.